As rest is a fundamental piece of a typical and sound developing individual, it ought to be respected with some regard. Rest encourages the body to revive satisfactorily, so the everyday difficulties will be better dealt with. Anyway, now it isn't totally realized how the real rest state can be precisely and definitely clarified in its physiologically marvel state. In spite of the fact that idea to be a somewhat latent condition of being, it is currently known to have an exceptionally unique cycle, whereas cerebrum doesn't whenever truly shut down total and rather plays out a few unseen capacities inside this state, hence its predominant significance. Essentially, rest states can be ordered into various stages, for example, NREM, which is non-fast eye development, and REM, which is quick eye development. This at that point can be separated much further into other connective classifications. It is fascinating to take note of that the rest cycle encounters a few phases in progression again and again all through one rest meeting, and this could require up to about 90 minutes each time. Preferably one ought to consistently attempt to get some degree of profound rest at whatever point conceivable through the rest practice, as this will guarantee a superior and more invigorated state after arousing. Some more negative impacts of absence of rest have been reported as having a more vulnerable insusceptible framework, lower while platelet check, decline in the arrival of development chemicals, pulse inconstancy, and a large group of different issues. For many individuals today, rest is something that is in every case last to be thought of. By and large, particularly the more youthful age, imagine that rest isn't actually significant and certainly a misuse of their valuable time. Anyway, it ought to be noticed that by and large when such people do endeavor to get some rest, it is frequently hard to awaken them. Anyway, the significance of rest ought not be limited in working out the components that are causing the absence of rest, or the powerlessness to get appropriate rest would be generally helpful. What do you need? Amusingly, the immense number of people do encounter some type of lack of sleep and its adverse impacts off and on again. However, there are times when this happens without the genuine acknowledgement of its event. Taking the time and exertion to see whether this wonder is happening haphazardly in one's existence with or without critical effect being raised merits the ruckus, so the circumstance can be tended to and amended. Some may clarify it as rest homeostasis, which for the most part suggests that the more rest an individual can encounter, the less probability of the individual falling asleep to rest at the smallest chance, and the more there is loss of rest, the more huge the need to rest will be. There are a few prospects why this may happen, and some of them are an excessive number of interruptions, non-helpful climate, high feelings of anxiety, such a large number of things that need quick consideration, and the rundown is endless. Recognizing a portion of the more well-known prospects that are causing the absence of rest will help the individual the attention on amending the circumstance, or in any event looking for reasonable arrangement that will help facilitate the failure for rest openings. Whenever the chance has been given to distinguish the purpose behind the lack of sleep than other than discovering arrangements, the individual should likewise resolve not to fall back into a similar negative circumstance at a later stage. There are a few sorts of objective setting practices that can be embraced to suit the need of dozing. These objectives will differ significantly starting with one individual then onto the next, so there is a need to characterize what your objectives are as a person inside the domain of rest. At the point when this is effectively done, then the idea of the essential components that will create the ideal outcomes would then be able to be planned. What is the point? Family objectives are an exceptionally incredible approach to fabricate trust, correspondence, fellowship, and numerous other positive components. It's likewise a decent method to urging kids to figure out how to set objectives inside their own little universes. Here are a few proposals that can be continued in the pursuit to distinguishing and defining objectives. The exercise of defining objectives ought to be finished with the cooperation of each relative. This interest ought to be dynamic as opposed to latent in age ought not be an impediment. More youthful kids can now and then be shockingly sagacious and can concoct truly serviceable answers for a specific objective. Limiting the measure of objectives the family needs to work with is additionally exhorted. When there is a lot of going on, there will be next to no focused spotlight on really making an achievement of the objective and its possible positive outcomes. Identifying and defining the objectives ought not be restricted to a specific season or stage in a relative's life. These activities ought to be done if and when essential and as an unconstrained design to guarantee there isn't compromising emotions emerging. Setting up a motivating force plan inside the objective setting activity will likewise support most extreme cooperation and consequences of all the relatives. Sometimes it could be important to set a time span for the proposed objective set. This is to guarantee a few outcomes can be impending rather than consistent stalling. Once in a while, in the wake of debilitating all current proven strategies for doing things, one necessities to change the attitude to be available to attempting new and more creative approaches to taking care of the lack of sleep issue. This is particularly vital if the current techniques are adding to the feelings of anxiety of an all-around troublesome circumstance. Change it. Here are a few recommendations on the progressions that can be made to make an all the more effortlessly looked for rest state. Taking up another and somewhat more truly requesting exercise routine. In spite of the fact that activity has consistently been a significant method of carrying on with a sound way of life, lifting the prerequisites of the activity routine will assist with debilitating the body into desiring for better rest meetings. Along these lines, empowering the person to get great rest meetings. Eating better and lighter suppers, particularly before rest design times, will likewise assist with making a more helpful body condition so that rest comes effectively and normally. Eating hefty dinners that are likewise undesirable in its substance will cause such inconvenience that the individual will be not able to instigate agreeable rest meetings. Basically, having all the correct data and instruments won't guarantee an individual is well headed to a decent night's rest. There is a need to incorporate every one of that has been discovered or recommended to be useful in the journey to recognize the best and most reasonable style for the person's necessities. Get going. Coming up next are a portion of the techniques that are suggested for thought. Forcing rest isn't something that is impossible. In opposition to prevalent thinking, with the correct devices, rest can be effectively prompted. Making the stage, utilizing restricted helping, playing delicate calming music, getting into agreeable clothing, having an open to dozing bed with similarly agreeable extras, all assistance to add to the overall instigating exercise. Neglecting to give due significance to this huge piece of the human life can and will brings about some negative outcomes. Coming up next are only some negative repercussions for not taking the significance of good resting designs into thought. The downfall. Poor quality and amount of work may become obvious when there is an overall absence of rest. This will make the individual have absence of focus and subsequently produce inadmissible work. Superfluous missteps and unsatisfactory work will at that point add to much more pressing issues, particularly when the said work is a contributing piece of a general collaboration. Associates will at that point start to scrutinize the significance of having a particularly individual as a colleague, and this may ultimately prompt one's work being in peril. Becoming touchy and fractious is additionally another negative attribute that will be common when there is absence of rest. This would then be able to prompt relationship issues. Whenever left unchecked, this negative conduct may spill into different parts of the person's life, causing harm en route that may not be rescued. Everybody ought to know about the significance of good rest designs. Indeed, even the individuals who are compulsive workers and the individuals who consider dozing a misuse of valuable time will in the end concede that dozing is a vital if not crucial piece of the human life. Despite the fact that not on the main concern rundown of a great many people it is by an undisputed prerequisite for everybody.